Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Say No One on 101, an essential guide for ops teams. I am your moderator, Bridgette L. Smith. I'm also a tech executive here in Silicon Valley, a former executive at Google, an investor, and I'm great at saying no. Our panel today includes industry experts in ops who are also experts in saying no and prioritization. In today's workspace, the most important skill for ops teams is the ability to prioritize. But how do you develop the ability to say no in a heavily matrix organization where teams are often have competing priorities? Well, during today's panel, you'll gain practical strategies for managing expectations. And you'll learn some of the small changes that you can make to get big results. But before we start our panel, I want to do just a quick reminder to please mute your device. And please post any questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to those at the end of our discussion. So let's get started. We've got a great panel, and I'd like to just start with introduction. So if each of you could just please say your name, your title, and your company, and we'll start with Aubrey.
Hey everyone, sorry about my voice. Got a little excited about some Halloween singing last night, but my name is Aubrey Sabala. I'm founder and CEO of Aubvious.com, a marketing, communications, and operations consultancy based in Atlanta, but working worldwide.
Welcome. And Bronson.
Yeah, Bronson Lingamfelter, Chief Operating Officer for One Earth Rising, coming out of the video game space.
Excellent. Nice to see you, Bronson. Ryan?
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Agresta, founder and CEO of Candidate.co. We're a personal referrals marketplace for tech hiring.
Excellent. We do a lot of that. Julia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Kim. I'm the VP of Revenue Operations here at Electric.
Excellent. Excellent. So we have an illustrious panel. We're going to start. We've got 30 minutes to spend today. We'll start with some rapid fire questions. And so I'm going to start with you, Aubrey. I am fascinated with your background. So I'm interested in what is the first step you would take to streamline processes and improve productivity for ops teams?
My background, I started as a biologist and a geneticist, so I think with data. So the first question I ask is, okay, before you need to know what processes to streamline, what information do you have? Because if you think about it, I think about it from even like a hiring and, resourcing standpoint. What are people spending their time on? Are they doing timesheets? What visibility and transparency do you have about how people are spending their time? That's the first step, because then you can go and either make tweaks to the processes, introduce something new, look at software. But without that layer of information and that data, it's really hard to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Excellent. Would anyone else like to add to that?
I definitely would. I mean, I always look at it, coming from a technology background, from an agile methodology, right? So keep it simple when you start, but really iterate, because you're not going to get that process perfect the first time around. And there's probably going to be some modifications that you're going to have to make. So really kind of iterate. And I believe it's really, really important for your team members to be actively participating and engaged, because there's just been long-term studies that show those employees, those team members that are actively participating and engaged tend to be more productive. And having that voice is really important. So being able to translate all of that internal knowledge and bringing that to those processes and those, sort of improvements is another really important step in making sure that you include everyone.
Mm-hmm. I'll add, the question itself assumes that there are processes. And we all know that many companies, big and small, sometimes have a difficult time documenting processes. So I would suggest one of the first steps is, in order to be efficient, streamline, and improve productivity, you actually have to know what processes you have in place and to document those processes so that you can streamline from there. So that would be my add to that question. Bronson or Ryan, would you like to add anything?
I'll just add, always looking at the tools and the technology that support the people that are executing those processes is really important. A lot of times there can be a lack of standardization or a lack of investment in those tools and processes. And anytime that's the underlying foundation supporting the people, it's always going to be a challenge to improve.
Yeah, I would agree. Bronson, you're shaking your head, so I'm going to say you agree too, right?
I agree with everything that's been said so far, so I'll leave it with that.
Excellent. You know what? I didn't say, audience, please take notes. I'm over here taking lots of notes because I plan to use exactly what we talk about when I end the call and continue my workday. So I hope you're able to take notes as well. We're going to be dropping some good gems here. Let's see. The next question we have is for Miss Julia. So Julia, when dealing with competing demands, what tips can you share to help ops teams prioritize effectively?
I would say that my top 3 tips are: 1, really start with your objectives or OKRs. Really try and figure out, does that ask meet one of those objectives, right? So if one of your OKRs is, increase the number of referrals from customers from, let's say, like 2% to 15%, is this particular ask, is this project one that rolls up into that OKR? Because that will help with prioritizing things. The second tip is, does it bring value to your business, right? If you have something that's a blocker for your sales team, that's obviously impacting revenue. So, really kind of figuring out, like, what is that thing that's really bringing value to your business, whatever, industry you're in. And the third thing I would say is, is there an intermediate solution you can kind of think of as a potential step, smaller step in getting to that final solution? So, a lot of times people get caught up in sort of like the big picture, right? Oh, we need to solve this larger problem. But, can you break that down? Can you iterate on that problem and break it down to a phase 1, right? So maybe that is a lower level of effort that you can do while you're dealing with those, larger issues that might be a higher priority. But at the end, it really comes down to managing expectations, right? So communicating those expectations early, aligning based on those expectations, reinforcing those expectations and communicating them out on a regular basis. And, most importantly, really holding teams accountable. So it's really that entire process when you think about prioritization, as a whole.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I +1 all of that. Anyone like to add to that?
I found, and this is also to a certain extent stage dependent, but I found reframing the question sometimes really helpful for some executives, and not asking if something is a good opportunity, but if it's core to the business objective, the primary business objective at that time. And I found that helps some people let go of things that they otherwise have difficulty moving on from.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in there too. The question I like to ask is also, what happens if we don't do this? What will be the repercussions if we don't? Because when there are either competing demands or competing initiatives, it's all right. Sometimes you get to a stalemate and you think, okay, well, what happens if we don't do this? And that can really add some clarity to then, okay, well, this one clearly can stop, and we have to address that one first.
I love that one, Aubrey. I'm going to add that to my toolkit. Yeah. I would add, I've run and built PMOs from the ground up for enterprise large scale companies. And I would add +1 to what Julia talked about when she talked about communication. I think over communicating, here are the priorities, here's where we are, here's the dashboard, and then also constant alignment across teams. Many teams work in silos and don't have visibility to the leadership level communication that goes out. And so we always have to, do a top-down communication so the teams understand the why. So the why, over communicating, and then dashboarding where we are and making sure people are held accountable, for sure. Yeah. Excellent. So any other thoughts on that one before we move on? I think we covered all the bases on that board. All right, let's move on. Let's see. The next question I have is for you, Mr. Bronson. When it comes to prioritization, communication is so important for managing expectations. What strategies can you share for keeping stakeholders informed without losing valuable time in the unnecessary meetings that we seem to have every single day?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Bridgette. As we've heard through the remarks so far, communication is key to everything. I like to start by understanding people's motivations. People take action either because they want to or they believe that they have to. And either case, open transparency and communication is your friend. It helps build consensus for the want. And in the case of the have to, helps people understand why they are pursuing certain business objectives. To talk a little bit about how we do that at One Earth Rising. So we run Scrum methodology. Julia talked about iteration. That's one of the powers of the whole Scrum methodology is it's fast moving. It allows you to iterate. One of the great outcomes is that everybody sees the priority list and they have input going into each sprint session. The other thing that we've done, which is radical and not for everybody, is what we call radical transparency. All of our meetings are recorded and shared with all the participants. Not often do people review them, so why do we do this? Subcultures in politics grow really quickly in fast-growing organizations. Recording everything forces accountability. We specifically operate in a very toxic industry, in the video game industry. And so our philosophy is if you want to change anything, you have to try and change everything. And toxicity can't breed in daylight. And then it's also a screening technique for recruiting to make sure that people share the values that we have. I mean, it's not common that you interview for a job and then get a recording of that interview. So admittedly, this all felt very awkward when we started it. And try telling an investor that you're recording the meeting with them. But the reality is the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Just to highlight the difference between giving people access to the knowledge that they need and forcing it on them. Employees need to know what they need to know to do their job. They don't want to feel out of the loop, but that doesn't mean that you have to force meetings on them. And we believe in providing the information for them to access as needed, meet when need to know, and treat company-wide meetings as a luxury. So a couple small just tidbits. Empower teammates to end meetings early and practice what you preach. I am a fan of 25 and 50, meaning cutting meetings short and leaving enough time to eliminate the action items that sit as blockers to getting the real work done. And then while I preach transparency, it's only once a priority is real. If leadership gets distracted, opportunities need to be evaluated by a small team so you can protect the executors from the distraction of what might be and so they can focus on what will be.
You know what? I feel a white paper in this. I feel like there's a white paper here. I took so many notes. You said toxicity cannot breed in daylight. Woo! That is, I'm going to put that on LinkedIn today. That is fantastic. I'm really interested. I have so many follow-up questions, Bronson, on radical transparency, record and share. So what's the listen rate? How do you track? Because there can be a lot of recordings and then you have to make time to listen to the recordings. So how often do people listen?
Rare, sub 5%. And it's usually because they're trying to reference some information and then are really happy that they have it, a record of it, and they can go back and find that out. But it's really more about the building the culture than the actual recordings themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then let's talk about the end early, 25 and 50. Like it's really hard. Most people like that has to be embedded in the culture because most meetings, especially at Google, are 30-minute chunks. And sometimes there's longer ones, but usually people end right at the 30-minute mark and then you're late to the next. And then it just kind of is a domino effect for your whole day. So how do we embed that in our culture?
You just have to adhere to it, and do it from the top down, and then that helps. And are we perfect? No, but one thing that I found interesting is a strategy that Amazon has everybody read a briefing going into the meeting. So the first couple minutes of the meeting are everybody reading, so everybody's on the same page. This I kind of think of this as the opposite. So many great ideas come out of meetings and then sit because somebody hasn't made an introduction or done something really easy and simple, and that can delay an entire critical path by days. And so it's really just adhering and forcing the team to do it, which is difficult, particularly with external meetings.
Mm-hmm. And then another question, again, a white paper in the making, action items. When you record and share everything, and you've got what sounds like a very regimented culture that you have to build from the ground up, how do you track cross-team action items across teams, across maybe, multiple teams? How do you do that?
Yeah, so we let the tech teams do their own thing. On the business teams, we're still small enough that we're able to have very strong degrees of communication. And it's also, going back, Ryan said something earlier about the tools that you use. The recording platform that we have enables you to just click a button during a meeting, and it will record that section as an action item. And then if you're using Slack, you can send in a QA issue, you can immediately send it over to the Slack. So it's another conversation around the tech stack that you use. But I think that's something that's gotten a lot stronger, at least in my experience, through the whole work from home COVID period.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'm much more, I was at Google too, so I'm very all in the Google suite, but I've also been on the Outlook suite before, and Teams. There's a plugin for Teams called Meeting Decisions. They're team based out of Ohio. It's incredible. You assign somebody to be a note taker. You can say, and there's just little nomenclature. It creates agendas, action items, sends it, integrates with different systems. I'm guessing it also works on Google Docs too. I haven't used it in a while, but it has been so transformative because, to your point, Bronson, about keeping people accountable. Once you know there's someone taking meetings and those action items and they're coming out, it then can add to a project plan, and you people aren't letting things slack or slide.
Talk about efficiency. Don't you hate going to a meeting and there's a topic, but there's no agenda? And then afterwards, you're like, well, who's on first base? So talk about inefficiency. So yeah, there's so many gems in this. Julia or Ryan, would you like to add before we move on?
I would like to. So here at Electric, we actually use what is called the RACI matrix. RACI is an acronym, right? It stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And it really does help you understand who your stakeholders are, right? So who should you invite to meetings? Who should you communicate out to on a regular basis just to keep informed? It really clarifies those roles and responsibilities, and is one of those activities you should do at the beginning of a project or beginning of something that you're taking on, because of the fact that it is hard to kind of figure out, who needs to be in these meetings, right? And being the most efficient in using everyone's time and the resources that you have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I nominate Bronson to start a shared document that we all have access to.
Careful what you wish for.
And we can put some logos on there and get some traction, because these are some really good really good tips. Again, toxicity cannot breed in daylight. Like, that's a headline. So that's the title of the white paper. All right, thank you. Let's move on. Ryan, I would love to hear your perspective. Sometimes we just have to say no to certain requests. How can ops leaders do this in a way that maintains good working relationships?
It's a great question, and I think this most often looks like an ops team saying no to another internal company partner, a revenue or demand generating team. And in these instances, it's important to remember that ops and that demand generating team are part of the same greater organization. And in turn, you can identify what is the common goal you're trying to achieve. Julia touched on earlier, this might be a company-wide OKR, it might be revenue growth or an excellent customer experience. Once you can center the conversation around those common goals, you have the ability to paint the picture of why saying no right now is in the best interest of that goal. And in turn, both you and your partners' teams, you're really trying to help them see the why behind the no. And what this should result in is building a partnership where the analysis of saying yes or no to those requests is transparent, how it's mutually beneficial, and ultimately can result in an effective working relationship.
Excellent. You are so efficient.
We're coming up at our time, so I'm trying to make sure we're
putting me to shame.
I love it.
I would love to add on. I agree with everything Ryan has said, but I also think it actually starts even before the request is asked, right? You internally need to know what your strategy is for managing these requests, because if you don't have a framework or you don't have a process in place for your internal team, that's going to be a problem, right? Because then your team doesn't know how to, respond to that ask or that request. And then, knowing your audience is important, right? And knowing what your goals and what outcome you want. But I don't actually think about it as saying no. I actually think about it in terms of how can we negotiate the best outcome for everyone involved, right? Because it's not really about saying no. It's about, okay, well, what can we do together to get to an outcome that works for everyone? And it may look different than when you started, but the idea is that you're going to work together. You're going to collaborate together to really figure that out. But I also, like to play devil's advocate sometimes. And, there's an argument for really also challenging your team, right, to achieve more, right? Can they be creative in finding solutions? And so I think a lot of times it's also like this reactive thing, but, you also need to challenge your internal team to say, hi, hey, like we've got this request, we've got these projects, we've got these asks, like how can we be creative in finding solutions to these things? So, yeah.
I wonder if this is a tool question, but how do you catalog the asks? Because in heavily matrix organizations, especially the size of a huge, gigantic tech company, the asks come in daily from all different places. So any recommendations on how do you catalog the asks? Think about how those asks are connected to the OKRs or not, prioritization of new asks and how they might fit into your playbook. Like any recommendations on how you catalog the asks and work those into your ecosystem?
In my experience at Amazon, everyone is on the same kind of trouble ticketing system, right? And so tickets would come into the ops teams and then they could be categorized in a very standardized way to say yes, no, requesting more information. When I was leading an ops team at Uber, we were using the demand generating team's CRM. And so I think anytime you can find that common tool that the most people at the company are interacting with, that's always going to be a great way to kind of standardize these requests and categorize them in a standard way.
Mm-hmm. And Bronson, you've got a white paper in the works, my friend. So what's your recommendation? I nominated you.
I think it's dependent on the team. So we've used Trello. I think I'm actually just going to steal from Ryan and echo. Whatever the team will adopt is what's most important, because there are a lot of tools that do a lot of similar things, but whatever you can effectively get the team together on.
Excellent. I see a lot of head nods. And I'm looking at the chat. Any questions for those who are joining us virtually? If you have any questions, let us know. We've got time for one or two really good questions. All questions are good questions, by the way. That's what my mom told me. So feel free to pop in a question, and I'll keep an eye on that. In the meantime, I think we'll go to our last. I'm going to just do a rapid fire. My rapid fire question is, I know we've touched a lot of things today as a collective panel. My question is, what one tip would you like people to take away from this conversation? So what one tip? So I'm going to start with Aubrey.
It goes back to communication. I like to make sure that we're doing the why behind the what. people really want to know what's in it for them, the benefits. So if you keep going back to that phrase and thinking like, okay, well, I might have to say no. I also have a toddler, so I do a lot of this too of, here's why you're not allowed to dance on the couch, because you might bump your head. So it really is getting the why behind the what, and it helps people ingest and understand as opposed to like a dictatorial relationship.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to pop over to you, Julia.
We actually had this really great workshop at Electric around empathy. And I think that's important to have empathy for, both your internal team, but also your stakeholders, right? Because by having that empathy, you're really looking at it from their perspective too. So it's part of that communication piece and understanding the why, as Aubrey was saying, but, having that empathy, I think, is important.
Excellent. Hey, Bronson, I see a question about the 2550 reference. Maybe you could just expound on that one for us.
Yeah, so it's basically saying the most meetings are blocked into 30 or 30 minutes or an hour. It fits nicely into calendars. And what I'm saying is sacrifice 5 or 10 minutes, whatever that ends up being. I think it's like 12% of the meeting or something like that, to take action on what's been discussed. It's basically a discipline, and it helps eliminate blockers along the critical path for any team, whatever you're trying to get done.
Excellent. Ryan?
We're at time, so I'll be very brief. Align internally on your common company goals and be transparent as possible with all your stakeholders on those decisions.
You're so packaged, Ryan. Communication, empathy, 2550, and alignment. With that, we're going to wrap up this panel conversation. Thank you, everybody. I want to give you a virtual hug from me to you, wherever you are in the world. Have a great day, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. So have a great day.
Thank you.